I move that the question be now put.
Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to talk about Clause 6 in this SOP, and I just do want to acknowledge the member whose bill this is for this SOP and for showing in a way the incredible determination that's required sometimes to get things to happen, and remembering that if Clause 6 helps one family, one household, one baby, that it's worth fighting for, even though it's not what was set out in the beginning. And I think that's a credit to Sue Moroney that she's agreed to develop Clause 6 with that in mind, because I think there was a huge longing from right across the House that we do something much bigger and better, but this is what is happening. So I'd like to address specifically in Clause 6 the issues around children with an impairment, and I think we've heard a lot about premature birth and multiple birth and some about disability, but today is the International Day for persons with disabilities. So I want to talk about children born with an impairment and how important Clause 6 is to them and their families, and how a decent society, and we hear a lot about vulnerable this and vulnerable that in this House, how a decent society would look after these families first. Would look after these families at a time of not only physical stress and cost, but a huge psychic shock. And so I really do commend the member for recognising the importance of paid parental leave of 26 weeks for these families whose child is born or who develops as a result often of birth trauma and impairment. Having seen other people go through this, and I feel fortunate not to have gone through it myself, having seen other people go through it with whom I've connected, there is tremendous shock and grief when a child is born with an impairment. So the first thing that happens is the grief cycle, and that takes a while to work through. And that is a cycle of denial, anger, depression, fear, all of those things we experience when our hopes for our newborn child are shattered. And part of that is because we do not celebrate as a society the importance of children, no matter how different they are from each other, no matter how different or so-called not normal they are. We do not have a society that's particularly tolerant. And I do believe that this clause is actually upholding and celebrating and recognising difference. And I would never want to romanticise the experience for parents. But the best thing we can do is acknowledge that there is a grief cycle that it takes time to go through before, and this is what usually happens, before that family comes to some kind of terms. But in order for that family to come to terms and start dealing with and living with the challenge that's been put out and recognising, loving and celebrating their child as they are and what is needed for that child, they need the support of the state. They don't need to be going to work, they need to be at home, and they need to have that financial support so that that grief cycle can be worked through, so that they can start looking for the social support, counselling, therapy, education, and understanding of exactly what it is they're dealing with, because they don't know, because it's all new. I had a friend connection whose child was born with Down syndrome and is a beautiful child with much potential, but that initial stage was very painful. It was very hard on the parents and the family, because remember, it's not just the baby and the parents during that first stage, it's also the other siblings. And there's a huge shock that has to be worked through. So paid parental leave is not a luxury, it's not an expense we can't afford, it's a total investment in making sure that those families can actually build a life. And it's not very much to ask of the rest of us who have been fortunate at that stage to have healthy babies with no impairments to provide that support. So I'm fully in support of the idea of 26 weeks paid parental leave for a child whose impairment would entitle the person to a government-funded disability support. I think that is the very least we can do, because if we don't, and if we assume that parents are going to just adapt, there will be suffering and there will also be opportunities missed. The parents should not be back at work when they're going through this process of trying to acknowledge what has happened and what needs to happen. So I'm very much respecting the member today for acknowledging that and saying how important that is. Because children born with an impairment can have a great life. I mean, I know this because my partner got Mr. Chair.
Ian Lees Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr.